My name is Madeline Parker, 26 years old, and tonight my hands are raw from scrubbing floors again. For as long as I can remember, I've been the unpaid housekeeper in my parents' immaculate home. Every speck of dust is my responsibility. Every meal, my duty to prepare. When my grandfather passed away last week, I thought nothing would change, just another funeral to organize, while my parents grieved publicly and criticized privately. But standing in Grandpa George's study after the service, holding a sealed envelope with my name written in his shaky handwriting, everything changed. Before I tell you how my grandfather's funeral transformed my life, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. Hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever felt trapped in a role you never asked for but couldn't escape. Growing up as the only child of Eleanor and Richard Parker meant living in a pristine home where appearances were everything. From the outside, we were the perfect family. Dad, a successful attorney, Mom, a respected interior designer, and me, their seemingly adored daughter. Our colonial-style house in an affluent Boston suburb was featured twice in home magazines, though the photographers never captured what went on behind closed doors. I was 8 when my mother first declared I was old enough to contribute to the household. What started as making my bed and putting away my toys quickly expanded to dusting the living room, then vacuuming the entire first floor, then scrubbing bathrooms. By 10, I had a laminated chore chart that covered most household tasks. "Madeline, you missed a spot," my mother would say, running her finger along the baseboards I'd just cleaned. She would stand there, arms crossed, watching me redo entire sections while explaining proper cleaning techniques. "You need to learn to do things right the first time." My father rarely criticized directly. Instead, he would address my mother as if I weren't there. "Eleanor, the kitchen still smells like last night's dinner. Maddie needs to try harder with the ventilation." Then he'd disappear into his study without acknowledging me. School achievements offered no reprieve. When I won the 6th grade spelling bee, Mom noted that I'd neglected to iron my collar properly. When I made honor roll in middle school, Dad remarked, "Good. Intelligence should translate to competence around the house, too." Grandpa George, my father's father, was the only one who seemed to notice. He lived about 30 minutes away, and his home became my sanctuary during weekly Sunday visits while my parents attended social functions. "You're doing all the housework yourself?" he asked one day when I was 12, watching me automatically collect and wash our teacups. "Mom says it teaches responsibility," I explained, reciting her familiar justification. "That's not responsibility, Maddie. That's exploitation," he said softly. Then, louder as my parents arrived to pick me up, "Richard, Eleanor, the girl works too hard. Let her be a child." "Dad, don't start," my father dismissed. "Madeline is learning important life skills, right, honey?" He patted my shoulder, the rare physical contact making me beam despite myself. "Of course, Daddy," I replied automatically. Grandpa's frown stayed with me, though. That night, I heard him arguing with my father on the phone, words like servant and childhood drifting through the air vents. The next day, my mother assigned me the additional task of waxing the hardwood floors weekly. High school brought more demands. While classmates joined clubs and sports, I rushed home to start dinner preparations. My mother would inspect the ingredients I'd selected, often making me start over if they weren't perfect. My father expected his shirts hand-pressed, claiming the dry cleaner never got his collars right. I tried joining the debate team sophomore year, thinking I could practice during lunch periods. When tournaments interfered with my Saturday deep cleaning routine, my mother developed migraines that required complete silence and darkness conditions I could only provide by canceling my competitions to care for her. My straight-A report cards earned brief nods. "This is expected, Madeline, not exceptional," my father would say, signing the bottom without looking at the detailed comments from teachers about my potential. I learned to shrink myself, to complete chores quickly and quietly, to study in the small hours when my parents slept. I learned to smother my resentment behind, "Yes, Mom," and "Right away, Dad." I learned to believe I deserved nothing more than to serve. Through it all, Grandpa George watched with concerned eyes. He tried to intervene in small ways, offering to take me to college tours, suggesting family therapy, even directly confronting my parents at holiday gatherings. But his efforts only led to restrictions on my visits with him. "Your grandfather doesn't understand modern parenting," my mother explained when I was 16, reducing our visits to once a month. "He's filling your head with unrealistic expectations." By senior year of high school, I'd perfected a parallel life. At school, I was quiet, but academically successful. Teachers praised my discipline and work ethic, never knowing it came from years of rigorous training in domestic servitude. At home, I was the perfect daughter maid, anticipating needs before they were voiced, maintaining the immaculate facade my parents prized. College applications became my secret hope for escape. I applied to universities across the country, dreaming of dormitories where I would only be responsible for half a room, cafeterias where others would cook my meals. When acceptance letters arrived, my parents intercepted several. I would learn this much later. The ones they allowed me to see came with discussions about practical considerations and financial responsibility. Somehow, these discussions always ended with me committing to a local university where I could save money by living at home. Hope flickered but refused to die. Maybe college would still mean freedom, even if I slept under their roof. Maybe being a university student would finally earn me the respect I craved from my parents. Maybe things would change. Boston University accepted me with a partial academic scholarship, not enough to cover living expenses, but a validation of my potential that made me cry when I read the letter. For once, my parents seemed genuinely pleased, though my mother quickly tempered her praise with practical concerns. "This is good, Madeline, but you'll need to balance your studies with your responsibilities at home," she said, already planning a modified chore schedule that would accommodate my classes. My father nodded in agreement. "University is about learning discipline, which you already have a head start on. Don't let academic pursuits distract you from real-world obligations." Still, those first weeks of freshman year tasted like freedom. Between classes, I lingered in coffee shops, marveling at having time to simply sit. I joined study groups that met in the library, relishing conversations that didn't revolve around household tasks. I made actual friends, Zoe, from my psychology class, and Abigail from English literature, who invited me to movie nights and campus events. "Maddie, why do you always clean up after everyone?" Zoe asked after I automatically washed all the dishes, following a small gathering in her dorm room. "You're like a cleaning ninja. We turn around and everything's spotless." I laughed it off, but her observation unsettled me. These behaviors were so ingrained I performed them without thinking. Then I met James in my political science seminar. Tall, with kind brown eyes and a quick smile, he noticed me despite my practiced invisibility. Our study sessions turned to coffee dates, then dinner dates, then long walks around campus, where we talked about everything and nothing. "Tell me about your family," he said one evening as we sat by the Charles River. I gave him the glossy version, successful parents with high standards, but James had a way of asking follow-up questions that unraveled rehearsed responses. "Wait, you do all the cooking and cleaning? Every day? While taking a full course load?" His incredulous expression made me see my situation through his eyes. "Maddie, that's not normal. That's not fair." For the first time, I confided in someone about my home life. James listened without interruption, his expression darkening. "That's not parenting," he said finally. "That's servitude." His words echoed Grandpa George's from years earlier. Hearing them from someone my age, someone who cared for me, cracked something open inside. The first semester passed in a blur of classes, cautious happiness with James, and ongoing household duties. I maintained my GPA while still handling most household tasks, sleeping less to accommodate both worlds. My parents noted my exhaustion not with concern but criticism about time management. Then, halfway through my junior year, everything collapsed. I was in the library studying for midterms when my phone rang. My mother, breathless, saying she'd collapsed and needed me immediately. "My father was out of town," she explained, "and the doctors suspected serious heart problems." I abandoned my books, called James to cancel our plans, and rushed home. I found my mother in bed, pale but alert, surrounded by prescription bottles. "The doctor says it's stress-induced arrhythmia," she explained weakly. "I need complete rest for at least 2 weeks. Your father can't take time off with the Mercer case going to trial. 2 weeks became a month. A month became the remainder of the semester. My professors allowed me to complete coursework online given the family medical emergency. James drove over whenever he could, but my caretaking schedule left little time for us. You need to set boundaries, he urged after my mother interrupted our brief coffee date with a call about needing her specific imported tea prepared. This isn't sustainable, Maddie. I'm worried about you. I promised to try, but every attempt to establish limits met with passive resistance. My mother's condition mysteriously worsened whenever I mentioned returning to campus. My father's disappointment weighed heavily. I thought you understood family comes first, Madeline. Your mother needs you. By the time I discovered my mother's heart condition had been greatly exaggerated, catching her exercising vigorously when she thought I was out, I had already withdrawn from in-person classes and registered for online completion of my degree. James and I had drifted apart, his frustration with my inability to prioritize myself eventually overwhelming his feelings for me. I love you, Maddie, but I can't watch you disappear into their needs, he said during our last conversation. Call me when you're ready to live your own life. He left a business card with his parents' address in Chicago, where he was moving after graduation. I tucked it away like a talisman from another possible life and settled back into the role I'd been groomed for since childhood. I completed my degree online, accepting my parents' narrative that this arrangement was best for everyone. The family business needed managing. My mother's health required monitoring. The household couldn't run itself. After graduation, I tried finding jobs that might provide enough income for independence. Each promising lead somehow fell through interviews scheduled during family emergencies, applications mysteriously unsubmitted from my computer, potential employers receiving calls about my prior commitments that limited my availability. Eventually, I cobbled together an online tutoring business that worked around my household obligations. The modest income went mostly toward household expenses, with my parents insisting they were teaching financial responsibility by charging me room and board that somehow always equaled my earnings. My days fell into a suffocating routine. Up at 5 a.m. to prepare breakfast and pack my father's lunch, cleaning until my first tutoring session at 9 a.m., breaks filled with laundry and meal preparation, more tutoring in the afternoon, dinner service, evening cleaning, and collapse into bed around midnight. Weekends meant deep cleaning, grocery shopping, and meal prep for the week ahead. This was my life at 26 university graduate, reluctant housekeeper, dutiful daughter, and slowly disappearing person. Through it all, my weekly visits to Grandpa George remained my lifeline. After my grandmother passed when I was 16, he lived alone in the modest colonial where my father grew up. Unlike my parents' showcase home, his was comfortably lived in, with books stacked on end tables and bird feeders crowding the windows. "There's my girl," he'd say every time I arrived, his face crinkling into a genuine smile that made me feel truly seen. In his presence, I wasn't Madeline the housekeeper or Maddie the disappointment. I was just Maddie, his beloved granddaughter. He never asked me to clean or cook, though I often did both automatically. Instead, he'd gently take the dishcloth from my hands or close the refrigerator door I was organizing. "Sit down, Maddie. Tell me about your week," he'd insist, serving me tea in mismatched cups. "The dishes can wait. You cannot." At his kitchen table, I could breathe. We played chess while discussing books, politics, and philosophy. He listened intently to my thoughts, asking follow-up questions that challenged and expanded my thinking. With Grandpa, I wasn't stupid or incompetent. I was thoughtful and insightful. "Your father wasn't always like this, you know," he told me one afternoon as we sorted through old photographs. He showed me images of my dad as a laughing little boy building sandcastles, as a serious teenager with a telescope, as a young law student with idealistic gleam in his eyes. Something changed him, the pressure to succeed, perhaps, or just the slow corruption of putting appearances before substance. These glimpses into my father's past helped me see him as human rather than simply my taskmaster. I treasured these stories, even when they made the contrast between the boy my father had been and the man he became more painful. Grandpa never criticized my parents directly after those early attempts backfired, but he taught me through stories and gentle questions to recognize the abnormality of my situation. Maddie, what would you tell a friend whose parents treated her the way yours treat you? He asked once. That's different, I defended automatically. How so? He pressed, not unkindly. I had no answer that didn't sound hollow, even to myself. For my 25th birthday, Grandpa gave me a leather-bound journal. Write your truth, he inscribed on the first page. Even if no one else ever reads it, that journal became another lifeline. In its pages, I could admit the resentment, anger, and despair I couldn't voice aloud. I documented particularly egregious demands, gaslighting comments, and the small rebellions I occasionally managed. I kept it hidden beneath a loose floorboard under my bed, paranoid about my mother finding it during her room inspections. When Grandpa's health began declining last year, our roles gradually reversed. I started bringing him meals, helping with his medications, and eventually assisting with basic self-care. My parents suggested moving him to a nursing facility for his own good, but I fiercely resisted. I can manage his care, I insisted, adding his needs to my already overwhelming schedule. I couldn't bear the thought of him spending his final days among strangers when I could provide the same loving attention he'd always given me. My parents acquiesced, though not without pointed comments about my divided loyalties and neglected duties at home. I think they recognized pushing too hard might finally break my compliance, as Grandpa George was the one line I wouldn't allow them to cross. During those final months, our conversations took on new depth. Confined mostly to his favorite armchair, Grandpa worried less about social niceties and spoke more directly. You deserve so much better than the life they've trapped you in, Maddie, he told me one rainy afternoon. Promise me you'll find a way out. I'm okay, Grandpa, I assured him, the automatic response of someone who had spent decades minimizing her own suffering. He clasped my hand, his grip surprisingly strong. No, you're not. But you will be. 2 weeks before he died, during a lucid moment between medication doses, he beckoned me close to his bed. When I'm gone, you'll find what you need in my study, he whispered. Bottom right desk drawer. Remember that I've always seen you, Maddie. The real you. I nodded, too choked with emotion to press for details. We never spoke of it again. His condition deteriorated rapidly after that, and he slipped away peacefully in his sleep, with me holding his hand. My grief was a physical weight, pressing on my chest and making each breath an effort. My parents' reaction, by contrast, was perfunctory. My father handled arrangements with businesslike efficiency, while my mother focused on appropriate funeral attire and reception details. Of course you're sad, Madeline, but dwelling on grief isn't productive, she remarked, handing me a list of cleaning tasks for the post-funeral reception. The catering company needs to know where to set up, and the guest bathroom needs attention. In their world, even mourning had a schedule and appropriate performance metrics. The morning of Grandpa George's funeral dawned crisp and clear, the kind of autumn day he would have appreciated. I'd been up since 4, preparing the house for the post-service reception. My mother supervised while arranging flower deliveries, pointing out spots I'd missed in my exhausted haze. These windows have streaks, Madeline, she commented, running a finger along the glass. And use the special polish on the banister. People will be touching it. I nodded automatically, retracing my steps with fresh cleaner, grief making my movements mechanical. My father worked in his study, emerging occasionally to approve arrangements or make calls about the service. By 10 o'clock, our home was immaculate. Food was arranged on serving platters under plastic wrap, and I finally had 20 minutes to shower and change before we needed to leave. I stood under the hot water, letting tears mix with the spray, allowing myself this brief moment of genuine emotion. At the funeral home, my role continued greeting relatives, directing them to seats, ensuring my parents had everything they needed. Aunt Sarah, my father's younger sister who lived in Seattle, gave me a long, searching look when she arrived. You look exhausted, Maddie, she said, touching my face gently. Are you getting any support? Before I could answer, my mother appeared at my elbow. Sarah, how lovely to see you. Despite the circumstances, Madeline has been absolutely indispensable during this difficult time. Aunt Sarah's eyes narrowed slightly. I'm sure she has been, she replied, an undercurrent in her voice I couldn't interpret. She squeezed my hand before moving to her seat. Throughout the service, I maintained the composed, supportive demeanor expected of me, even as I felt Grandpa's absence like a physical wound. When the minister asked if anyone wished to speak, my father delivered a polished eulogy about his father's professional accomplishments and community standing. When he finished, I found myself standing on shaking legs. I'd like to say something, I heard myself say. My parents' surprised expressions were almost comical. I rarely took initiative in public settings. The minister nodded encouragingly, and I made my way to the podium. Grandpa George taught me to play chess when I was 7, I began, my voice trembling. He said chess wasn't just about strategy, but about valuing each piece for its unique contribution. The words flowed then, about his patience and wisdom, his bird feeders and mismatched teacups, his ability to listen in a way that made you feel truly heard. I spoke about his laughter and his storytelling, the small kindnesses he showed to everyone from grocery clerks to bank tellers. When I finished, there wasn't a dry eye in the room except for my parents, who wore identical expressions of mild discomfort at this display of genuine emotion. After the service, everyone gathered at Grandpa's house for the reception. As I circulated with trays of finger sandwiches, older relatives patted my arm and murmured about what a good girl I was and how fortunate my parents were to have such a helpful daughter. You're a treasure, Maddie, my mother's college friend gushed, watching me collect empty glasses. Eleanor, you raised her right. My mother beamed, accepting credit for my servitude, as though it were a character achievement rather than systematic conditioning. Between serving duties, I noticed Aunt Sarah watching me with a troubled expression. She cornered me in the kitchen as I refilled a water pitcher. You're still living at home, she stated rather than asked. Yes, I confirmed, automatically wiping a water droplet from the counter. And you're still doing everything. Her gesture encompassed my catering activities. I shrugged. They need the help. Sarah's mouth tightened. Did George ever talk to you about? She stopped abruptly as my mother entered. Madeline, the coffee service needs refreshing, my mother instructed, giving Sarah a cool nod before exiting. We'll talk later, Sarah whispered, but the opportunity never came. As the gathering thinned, I remembered Grandpa's words about his study. While my parents said goodbyes to the last guests, I slipped away to the room that had been his sanctuary. The familiar smell of books and pipe tobacco, though he'd given up smoking years ago, made tears spring to my eyes. I moved to his desk, an antique roll-top with dozens of small drawers and cubbies. The bottom right drawer stuck slightly as I pulled it open. Inside lay an unmarked manila envelope, sealed with red wax impressed with Grandpa's distinctive G monogram. My name was written on the front in his shaky handwriting. My heart pounding, I slipped it into my purse just as I heard footsteps in the hallway. I quickly shut the drawer and pretended to be straightening books when my mother appeared in the doorway. What are you doing in here? She asked, suspicion edging her voice. Just saying goodbye, I managed, gesturing to the bookshelves. I wanted to see if there were any books I could take to remember him by. Her eyes narrowed slightly, but she merely said, Your father wants to inventory everything properly before anything leaves this house. Come help with the cleanup now. That evening, after an exhausting day of emotional suppression and physical labor, my parents retired early, citing the strain of the day. I waited until their bedroom light switched off before retrieving the envelope from my purse. Sitting cross-legged on my bed, I carefully broke the wax seal. Inside I found 3 items: a USB drive, a small key labeled First National 247, and a letter handwritten on Grandpa's personal stationery. My dearest Maddie, it began. If you're reading this, I've passed on, and it's time for you to know the truth. I've watched for years as Richard and Eleanor treated you not as their beloved daughter, but as their personal servant. I tried to intervene when you were younger, but my efforts only made your situation worse, for which I'll never forgive myself. Tears blurred my vision as I continued reading. I've documented their treatment of you over the years, the excessive chores, the emotional manipulation, the sabotage of your independence. You'll find everything on the enclosed drive, including recordings of conversations where they've admitted their intentions. My hands shook as I held the USB drive, a small black rectangle containing evidence of what I'd experienced, but could never quite bring myself to name. The key opens a safety deposit box containing legal documents and further evidence. I've established a trust in your name that should give you the financial freedom to leave. My attorney, Rebecca Goldstein, is expecting your call. Her information is on the back of this letter. The final paragraphs broke the dam of my composure. Maddie, what they've done is wrong. It's exploitation and emotional abuse, no matter how they've justified it. You deserve freedom. You deserve to live your own life on your own terms. I couldn't save you while I was alive without making things worse, but perhaps I can help you save yourself now. You are intelligent, capable, and worthy of love that doesn't come with conditions or servitude. Remember that I've always seen the real you, and she is magnificent. With all my love, Grandpa. I pressed the letter to my chest, silent sobs racking my body. For the first time, someone had not only seen but documented the reality I'd been gaslit into questioning. The validation was both excruciating and liberating. I hid the letter, USB, and key in my journal's hiding place, my mind reeling with possibilities and fears. Freedom suddenly seemed possible, but the thought was as terrifying as it was exhilarating. 2 days after the funeral, I accompanied my parents to the reading of Grandpa's will at his attorney's office. Rebecca Goldstein, a petite woman with steel-gray hair and sharp eyes, greeted us in a conference room lined with law books. "Thank you all for coming," she began formally, laying out documents on the polished table. "Before we begin, I should note that George was very specific about his wishes." My father nodded impatiently. Yes, yes. Dad was always detail-oriented. "Let's proceed." Miss Goldstein read through standard provisions, charitable donations, disposition of personal effects, maintenance funds for Grandpa's house until it could be sold. My father leaned forward when she reached the main estate distribution, a slight smile playing on his lips. "Regarding the remainder of the estate," she continued, "George Parker has established 2 separate provisions. To his son, Richard Parker, he leaves his investment portfolio and 30% of liquid assets." My father frowned. 30%? There must be some mistake. Miss Goldstein looked at him over her reading glasses. "There's no mistake, Mr. Parker." To his granddaughter, Madeline Parker, George leaves his house, art collection, and the remaining 70% of liquid assets to be held in trust. The silence that followed was deafening. My mother recovered first. "That can't be right. Madeline lives with us. She has no need for such assets." Furthermore, Miss Goldstein continued as if there had been no interruption, "The trust stipulates that to access these funds, Madeline must establish residence separate from her parents for a minimum of 1 year." My father's face flushed crimson. "This is outrageous. My father wasn't in his right mind toward the end. We'll contest this immediately." Miss Goldstein calmly slid a document across the table. George anticipated that reaction. "Here's a video recording of him explaining his decisions, made 6 months ago, with 2 physicians present to verify his mental competence." My mother's hand gripped my wrist painfully under the table, her nails digging into my skin. "Madeline will, of course, decline this inappropriate arrangement," she said with artificial sweetness. "We're a family. We make decisions together." I said nothing, shock rendering me mute. Miss Goldstein's eyes met mine briefly, a flicker of understanding passing between us. "Madeline is 26 and legally entitled to make her own decisions," the attorney stated. "The trust is irrevocable. I have documentation ready for her to sign should she wish to claim her inheritance." "We need to discuss this as a family," my father interjected, standing abruptly. "Come, Eleanor, Madeline, we're leaving." The drive home passed in ominous silence, tension thick enough to choke on. As soon as our front door closed, my father exploded. "What the hell was that?" he demanded, rounding on me. "Did you know about this? Have you been conspiring behind our backs?" "No, I'm as surprised as you are," I stammered. backing away. Your grandfather has lost his mind, my mother hissed, dropping all pretense of composure. After everything we've done for you, providing a home, food, education, this is how you repay us? By allowing him to disinherit your father? I didn't ask him to do this, I protested weakly. You must have influenced him, my father accused, pacing like a caged animal. All those private conversations, all those hours at his house. You turned him against us. That's not true. I found my voice strengthening slightly. Grandpa made his own decisions. And now you're planning to abandon your family for money, my mother said, her voice dripping with disdain. How mercenary you've become, Madeline. How disappointingly selfish. The familiar guilt tactic washed over me, but something was different. Grandpa's letter had created a small crack in their conditioning, and their words didn't land with the usual crushing weight. It's not about money, I said quietly. It's about having choices. My father laughed coldly. Choices? You've always had choices. You chose to live here, to be part of this family. Did I? The question slipped out before I could stop it. My parents exchanged glances, a silent communication that usually preceded a new strategy. Madeline, my mother began, her tone softening to the honeyed manipulation. I knew well, you're upset. We all are. Grief does strange things to people's thinking. Let's take some time to process before making any rash decisions. What's there to process? I asked. Grandpa left me an inheritance with conditions. Conditions designed to tear this family apart, my father interjected. Is that what you want? To destroy everything we've built together? The guilt spiral began decades of conditioning, making me question my right to even consider independence. I'm not trying to destroy anything, I said. But maybe it's time I had my own place. My mother's face crumpled into practiced despair. After everything we've sacrificed for you, your father working himself to exhaustion to provide for you, my health issues that you know I can't manage alone. I wouldn't be abandoning you, I tried. I'd just be living separately. So you can squander your grandfather's money while we struggle? My father demanded. Is that the daughter we raised? Someone who puts greed before family loyalty? Round and round we went, their accusations growing more elaborate, my defenses weakening under the onslaught of guilt and manipulation. They reminded me of every sacrifice, every expense, every moment of parental devotion that apparently entitled them to my eternal servitude. Finally, exhausted, I retreated to my room, their voices following me up the stairs. Think about what this would do to your mother's health, Madeline. Is money worth her suffering? I closed my door, leaning against it as tears streamed down my face. For the first time, I could see their tactics clearly, the guilt trips, the exaggerated sacrifices, the medical emergencies that manifested at conveniently controlling moments. The next morning, my mother was bedridden with what she described as crushing chest pain brought on by stress. My father instructed me to care for her, while he went to consult their lawyer about contesting the will. See what your selfishness has caused? He said pointedly before leaving. She might need to go to the hospital if this continues. I brought my mother tea and medication, watching as she winced dramatically when reaching for the cup, then forgot her pain completely when her phone chimed with a message from her interior design colleague. Mom, I said carefully, I think we should talk about Grandpa's will without getting emotional. She immediately clutched her chest. I can't handle this right now, Madeline. The doctor said I need absolute calm. Which doctor? I pressed. When did you see them? Her eyes narrowed. Are you questioning my medical condition? After everything I've done for you? Something snapped inside me. Yes, actually, I am. Just like I questioned it when you miraculously developed heart problems during my junior year of college. The heart problems that somehow never required actual hospital visits or prevented you from attending social functions, but only flared up when I mentioned returning to campus. Her face hardened, the fragile invalid act dropping entirely. You ungrateful little... I've given you 18 years of unpaid housekeeping, I interrupted, my voice steadier than I'd ever heard it. I think my debt is paid. I walked out of her room, shaking but resolute, and went straight to my hiding place. I retrieved Grandpa's letter, the USB drive, and the safety deposit box key. Whatever was in that box, I needed to see it now. The next morning, I left the house at dawn while my parents still slept. I'd been up most of the night, alternating between panic attacks and moments of unexpected clarity. By 4 a.m., I'd made a decision I would at least see what Grandpa had left for me before committing to any course of action. First National Bank opened at 8:30 a.m. I arrived at 8:15, pacing nervously outside until an older security guard noticed and unlocked the door early. "You look like you could use a cup of coffee, miss," he said kindly, gesturing to the bank's waiting area. "We've got some brewing inside." His small kindness nearly broke me. I thanked him and sat rigidly on a vinyl chair, clutching my purse containing the key and my ID. When the bank manager arrived, I requested access to box 247. "Of course, Miss Parker," she said, after verifying my identification. "Your grandfather added you as an authorized user last year. Please follow me." In a private viewing room, she left me alone with the long metal box retrieved from the vault. My hands trembled as I inserted the key and lifted the lid. Inside, organized with Grandpa's characteristic precision, lay several folders labeled with dates spanning back to my childhood. I opened the earliest one, marked Madeline, age 10. The contents stole my breath. Photographs of me cleaning windows, scrubbing floors, and cooking meals, all taken from what must have been Grandpa's car parked across the street. Handwritten notes documented times, dates, and tasks. A journal entry described my father dismissing my elementary school art award because I'd left water spots on the bathroom mirror. Each subsequent folder built the case. Report cards with teacher comments about my exhaustion. Medical records noting unexplained weight loss during high school. Printouts of text messages between my parents discussing how to prevent me from attending a college orientation weekend. Grandpa had been gathering evidence for 16 years. The folder labeled financial contained the most damning revelations. Credit card statements in my name for accounts I'd never opened. Loan applications with my forged signature. Letters from prestigious universities offering full scholarships that had never reached me. Most disturbing was a recording transcript from what appeared to be a conversation between my parents at a restaurant, dated shortly before my birth. Richard. Having a child makes sense financially. Live-in help is expensive. Eleanor. Exactly. We raise her right, she handles the house, we maintain our lifestyle without the cost of staff. Perfect arrangement. Richard. Besides, it's not like we're abusing her. We're teaching valuable life skills. Eleanor. And she'll always have a home with us. It's practically charitable when you think about it. Tears blurred my vision as the truth crystallized. I hadn't been born to be loved. I'd been born to be used. My entire existence was predicated on my utility. Another folder contained legal documents, the trust details, showing Grandpa had left me not just 70% of his liquid assets, a substantial sum, but also ownership of his house. A detailed financial plan outlined how the trust would cover living expenses, education, and even therapy for at least 5 years, giving me time to establish independence. The final folder held a letter from James, my college boyfriend, dated 3 months after our breakup. It was addressed to me at my parents' home, but the envelope showed it had been returned to sender, marked recipient unknown. In it, James apologized for his ultimatum, saying he still loved me and wanted to help me break free from my parents' control if I was willing. He'd included his parents' address in Chicago and his phone number. They had intercepted my mail. They had hidden opportunities. They had systematically isolated and exploited me while convincing me it was normal, loving, even. The security guard knocked gently on the door. "Everything all right, miss? You've been in here nearly 2 hours." I looked up, suddenly aware of my tear-streaked face and the documents spread across the table. "No," I said honestly, "but I think it might be. Eventually." I carefully returned everything to the box, except for the financial documents, James's letter, and a business card for Rebecca Goldstein that had been paper-clipped to the trust paperwork. These I placed in my purse. As I was preparing to leave, I noticed another envelope taped to the inside lid of the box. It contained a single key with a tag reading 1420 Maple Street, Grandpa's house, and a note, "It's yours now. Use it if you need immediate sanctuary." In the bank lobby, I paused at a courtesy phone and dialed Rebecca Goldstein's number with shaking fingers. "Miss Goldstein? This is Madeline Parker. I just visited the safety deposit box." "Yes. I need help. Can I meet you today?" Her response was immediate and assured. "My office, 1 hour. Don't go home first if you're concerned about confrontation." I hung up, a strange lightness replacing the hollow feeling in my chest. The security guard who had let me in early noticed my expression. "Better news than you expected?" he asked kindly. "No," I replied, surprising myself with sudden honesty. "Exactly as bad as I feared. But now I know I'm not crazy." He nodded with unexpected understanding. "Sometimes that's worth more than good news, young lady." I walked out into the late morning sunlight, finally seeing my life through clear eyes and for the first time, glimpsing a possible future beyond my parents' control. Rebecca Goldstein's office was a study in understated elegance, with bookshelves lining the walls and a desk that looked like it had witnessed decades of confidences. She listened without interruption as I detailed my discoveries, occasionally making notes on a legal pad. "Your grandfather came to me about a year ago with his concerns," she explained when I finished. "He was worried that simply leaving you money wouldn't be enough, that your parents would find a way to control it or prevent you from leaving." He was right, I admitted. If I'd gone home after the will reading, I'm not sure I'd have ever left again. Rebecca nodded. "George was determined to break their hold on you. That's why he structured the trust with the 1-year independent living requirement to force a clean break." "They'll fight this," I said. "They'll claim I'm mentally unstable or that Grandpa was manipulated." "They can try," she replied with cool confidence. "The documentation your grandfather gathered is extensive, and the trust is legally sound. More importantly," she leaned forward, "you're an adult. They have no legal right to control your movements or finances." She helped me develop a thorough exit strategy. First, we contacted a locksmith to change the locks at Grandpa's house. Then she arranged for a police escort to accompany me to my parents' home to retrieve my personal belongings. "Is that really necessary?" I asked, the idea of police involvement making my stomach churn. "Based on what you've told me about their controlling behavior, yes," she said firmly. "People who lose control often become desperate. The police presence isn't just for your physical safety, it's to prevent them from making false accusations against you." We scheduled the move for the following day, giving me time to open a new bank account and transfer the initial funds from the trust. Rebecca also helped me draft a clear, concise letter informing my parents of my decision to move out, emphasizing that I would not discuss it until I was settled in my new residence. That night, I stayed in a hotel Rebecca recommended, using the trust funds for the first time. Sitting on the edge of the unfamiliar bed, I experienced both paralyzing terror and unexpected peace. I barely slept, but by morning, my resolve had solidified. The police escort, a female officer named Sergeant Miller, met me outside my parents' house at precisely 10 a.m. when I knew both my parents would be home. Rebecca waited in her car at the curb, there to provide legal support if needed. I rang the doorbell of the house I'd cleaned and maintained for most of my life. Feeling like a stranger, my mother answered, her expression shifting from confusion to alarm when she saw the police officer beside me. "Madeline? What is this?" she demanded, attempting to pull me inside while ignoring the officer. "Mrs. Parker," Sergeant Miller interjected, "your daughter is here to collect her personal belongings. I'm present to ensure this proceeds without incident." My father appeared behind her. "This is ridiculous. Madeline, dismiss this officer and come inside so we can discuss this family matter privately." "There's nothing to discuss," I said, my voice remarkably steady. "I'm moving out. Today." Their shock quickly morphed into their usual tactics. My mother's hand flew to her chest as she staggered slightly, while my father's expression hardened into righteous indignation. "Officer," my mother said breathlessly, "my daughter has been under enormous strain since her grandfather's death. She's not thinking clearly. She has a history of emotional instability." Sergeant Miller remained professionally neutral. "Ma'am, Miss Parker is an adult, making a legal decision about her residence. Unless you have court documents establishing guardianship, she's free to leave with her personal property. This is absurd, my father sputtered. Madeline, what lies have you been telling? After everything we've done for you? I held up the letter Rebecca had helped me prepare. This explains my decision. I'd like to collect my clothes, personal documents, and a few sentimental items. I'll be out of your way in 30 minutes. My mother snatched the letter. You can't possibly believe we'll allow this. It's not about allowing, I replied. It's happening. With Sergeant Miller accompanying me, I went upstairs to my bedroom. I worked efficiently, packing only what truly mattered: clothes, photos, my hidden journal, and a few books. My mother followed, alternating between tearful pleas and sharp criticism. Where will you go? How will you manage? You've never lived alone, she insisted. I'll be fine, I answered, continuing to pack. Your father and I only wanted what was best for you, she tried next, her voice honey-sweet. We can discuss adjustments to household responsibilities if that's the issue. I paused, looking directly at her. Mom, I've been working as your full-time, unpaid housekeeper since I was 10 years old. There's no adjustment that fixes that. Her expression hardened. So this is about money? After all we've provided? No, I said quietly. It's about freedom. Downstairs, my father was on the phone, his voice raised. I don't care what the trust says. Richard, she's being manipulated. We need an emergency injunction. As I carried my suitcase toward the door, he blocked my path. You walk out that door, you're no longer our daughter, he threatened. The words that would have devastated me just days before now washed over me without effect. I haven't been your daughter for a long time, I replied. I've been your maid. His face flushed with anger. You'll come crawling back when you fail. You have no idea how to survive without us. Maybe, I acknowledged. But I'd rather try and fail than never try at all. As I walked out the door, my mother called after me. This is how you repay us? With betrayal? After all our sacrifices? I turned back one final time. Thank you for raising me. I hope someday you understand why I had to leave. The physical sensation of stepping onto the sidewalk was extraordinary, like invisible chains falling away. Though I knew the psychological chains would take much longer to break, this first step felt monumental. Rebecca drove me to Grandpa's house, my house now, where the locksmith had already changed all the locks. She helped me settle in, making sure I had groceries and basic necessities. The hard part isn't over, she warned gently. They'll likely try to contact you to regain control. You might consider changing your phone number. I will, I promised. And I'll start therapy next week, like we discussed. That first night alone in Grandpa's house was both terrifying and exhilarating. I wandered from room to room, touching familiar objects that now belonged to me. In his study, I found a framed photo of the two of us I'd never seen before me as a teenager, laughing at something he'd said, looking carefree in a way I rarely did at home. I placed it on the bedside table of what was now my bedroom. As I crawled under the covers, exhaustion from the day's emotional marathon finally catching up, I whispered to the empty room, "Thank you, Grandpa." For the first time in my adult life, I fell asleep without setting an alarm for pre-dawn cleaning duties. The silence of freedom was the sweetest lullaby I'd ever heard. 1 year has passed since I walked out of my parents' home with a suitcase and a police escort. 1 year of freedom, growth, stumbling, learning, and slowly rebuilding my identity outside of servitude. The journey hasn't been linear or easy. The first few weeks felt like withdrawal from a powerful drug, the familiar compulsion to clean constantly, to anticipate others' needs before my own, to seek approval through service. I would wake at 5 a.m. in a panic, convinced I'd failed to prepare breakfast or forgotten some critical task. I'd find myself automatically cleaning spaces that were already clean, unable to sit still and simply exist. Dr. Levine, my therapist, helped me understand these behaviors as trauma responses. You're experiencing something similar to Stockholm Syndrome, she explained during our second session. Your parents conditioned you to believe your worth was tied to your utility. Breaking that conditioning takes time. Therapy twice weekly became my lifeline. Through Dr. Levine's guidance, I began to recognize the patterns of emotional abuse that had shaped my development. I learned that my hypervigilance, people-pleasing tendencies, and inability to prioritize my own needs weren't personality traits, but survival mechanisms. You developed these behaviors because they kept you safe in an unsafe environment, she explained. Now you need to develop new behaviors for a different reality. That different reality took shape slowly. I established a routine that prioritized self-care, regular meals, sufficient sleep, leisure activities that had been denied for decades. Simple pleasures became profound discoveries. Sleeping until 8 a.m. without guilt, leaving dishes in the sink overnight, ordering takeout when I didn't feel like cooking. 3 months after moving into Grandpa's house, I found the courage to call James using the number from his intercepted letter. Our conversation was awkward at first, years of silence and misunderstanding creating a barrier. But as I explained what had happened, the controlled environment, the intercepted mail, the manipulated medical emergencies, understanding dawned in his voice. I knew something wasn't right, he said. I just didn't understand the scope of it. I'm so sorry I gave up on you, Maddie. We began talking regularly, rebuilding a friendship without romantic pressure. James had married the previous year, a wonderful woman named Gail, who reminds me of you in her kindness, but his support as a friend proved invaluable. He understood parts of my journey that even my therapist had to work to comprehend. 6 months into my independence, I secured a position teaching English at a community college. The flexible schedule accommodated my continued therapy, and the work itself provided purpose beyond survival. Standing in front of a classroom of adult learners, sharing my passion for literature and writing, I discovered a confidence I never knew existed within me. My parents made several attempts to re-establish contact and control. They sent letters alternating between guilt trips and hollow apologies. They showed up unannounced at Grandpa's house, necessitating a restraining order that Rebecca helped me obtain. They even contacted my department chair at the college, claiming concern about my mental stability, a move that backfired when Rebecca provided counter-documentation. Eventually, their attempts tapered off. The last communication I received was a terse email from my father. When you're ready to apologize for your ingratitude, we'll consider reconciliation. I didn't respond. The relationship that surprised me most was with Aunt Sarah, who reached out shortly after I moved. Over coffee at a neutral cafe, she confessed to long-held suspicions about my treatment. I saw the signs whenever I visited, she admitted, guilt heavy in her voice. The way they spoke to you, the endless chores, how they dismissed your achievements. But Richard would become so defensive whenever I brought it up that eventually I stopped trying. Why didn't you do more? I asked. The question that had haunted me about everyone who had witnessed my situation. Sarah's eyes filled with tears, fear, uncertainty, the convenient belief that maybe I was overreacting. All the excuses people make when confronting abuse means confronting their own complicity. She reached for my hand. I failed you, Maddie. I'm so sorry. Her honesty offered a path to a relationship. I'd never had an adult family connection based on mutual respect rather than exploitation. We now meet monthly, building a tentative but genuine bond. In my journey toward healing, I've discovered that freedom requires more than physical distance from abuse. It demands constant vigilance against internalized patterns. I still struggle with automatically saying yes to requests, with prioritizing others' comfort above my own, with the persistent belief that I must earn the right to exist through service. Recovery isn't about never struggling, Dr. Levine reminds me. It's about recognizing the struggle and making conscious choices rather than automatic ones. Those conscious choices grow easier with practice. I've learned to pause before agreeing to commitments, to check in with my own needs before addressing others, to recognize when guilt is manufactured rather than warranted. I've discovered the profound difference between helping from love and helping from fear. On the anniversary of my independence, I visited Grandpa George's grave with fresh flowers and a heart full of gratitude. Kneeling beside his headstone, I told him about my teaching position, my small circle of genuine friends, my first attempts at dating, my growing confidence in setting boundaries. You gave me more than financial freedom, I whispered. You gave me permission to see the truth. You saw me the real me, when I couldn't even see myself. Standing there in the gentle spring sunshine, I realized that Grandpa's greatest gift wasn't the trust fund or the house. It was the truth, painful, devastating truth that shattered the false reality my parents had constructed. That truth was both wound and weapon, hurting me deeply while simultaneously arming me for freedom. I'm still healing, still discovering who Madeline Parker is when she isn't defined by servitude. Some days the old doubts creep in, whispering that I'm selfish, ungrateful, doomed to fail without my parents' guidance. But those whispers grow fainter as my authentic voice grows stronger. If you're watching this and recognizing your own reflection in my story, if you live in fear of disappointment, if your value is measured in tasks completed, if love feels conditional on service, please hear me. You deserve freedom. Your worth isn't tied to your utility. The people who truly love you will celebrate your independence, not punish it. Breaking free is terrifying. The familiar cage, however painful, offers certainty that freedom cannot. But beyond that fear lies a life that belongs truly to you, messy, imperfect, and gloriously your own. Thank you for listening to my story. If it resonated with you, please like this video and subscribe for more conversations about healing from family trauma. Share in the comments if you've experienced similar dynamics or found ways to establish healthy boundaries. Have you ever had someone like my Grandpa George who saw the truth when others didn't? I read every comment and draw strength from this community of survivors and thrivers. Until next time, remember that your value exists independently of what you do for others. You are enough, exactly as you are.